Welcome to the Inside Out Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Knoll. Today is going to be relationship with food, a little bit of story time, hopefully more of a conversational style rather than more of an educational lecture, with a hope that we can get some education as far as awareness of eating disorders and an understanding and a way to evaluate your own relationship with food and the way you see food based off of prior history that you've gone through. My goal is to start this as a way to kind of go into intuitive eating. I always tell everyone I work with, the end goal is intuitive eating. And what intuitive eating really is at the core is to trust your body to crave the things you need for the micronutrients and the macronutrients, the portions, calories, and the quality of food based off of the needs of the body internally and externally. So that means maintaining weight or sitting a weight that is healthy for your body. That could be your performance, making sure that your muscles are recovering. And that's also mental health with food. So being able to go on a trip and enjoy it, but still feel good by the choices you're making with food without having so much stress and anxiety because the quality may not be what you have at home. And then really understanding, like, are my ghrelin and my leptin, my hunger and satiety hormones giving me accurate cues so that I know that I'm consuming enough or I'm not consuming too much. And it's a learning curve to really know whether or not it is accurate to what your body actually needs. So it's a process. So most people can't just out of the gate, well, yes, that is the average person's diet. They're simply eating when they get hungry. They're eating what sounds good. Yes, that is the true what is intuitive eating. But to do it in a way that is actually nourishing our bodies correctly, we do have to look at more than that. So we need to make sure our body is trained to know. And then we have the education to also be able to make good food choices. And then we have the excess of foods around us so that if we're trying to think what sounds good and we're looking in our pantry and all we have is processed sugary foods, yeah, we're likely to make a choice that is maybe less than positive for our performance or our internal health. So a little bit on my story, and every person's story is completely different, but I would like to share this part of it because it's a big part of who I am and why I made this business and why I really feel passionate about helping people, because I've been through every single spectrum of disordered eating and poor relationship with food that there is. And I think it was a gift from God that I didn't want to appreciate in the moment, but in hindsight and looking back at it, it's given me an appreciation and a ability to understand the mental struggle of weight loss and mental struggle of your body's response and energy and bowel movements and hormones, and the way you see food and being afraid of foods and being able to enjoy food freely, and the actual like freedom that does come from that if you have not been able to experience that in a way that I don't think I would have if I had just been a normal person with a healthy view of food and never dealt with these things. It's a little bit vulnerable because it does, I had an eating disorder at the beginning of my business, or truly the beginning of college. I wouldn't say my business. I was working outpatient and still dealing with a raging disorder that had been masked into orthorexia, which I thought, quote unquote, I fixed it. I'm just eating really healthy. So I guess to go back, it started really about 12, 13. Went to the doctor. I don't remember exactly what age. Really had never worried about weight. It's never been something that was on my mind. I wasn't a big kid. I didn't have to think about it. It was very active. Went to the doctor, and I'm a twin, and I was heavier than my twin by quite a lot. And not only that, I was over the expected weight change in a year. I had put on a lot more weight than the doctor expected, and I was then in a higher weight category than I should have been for my height and that current age. And the doctor kindly said to my mother, "Hey, how's her appetite?" And Mom's like, "Oh, she eats great, huge portions, good eater." And the doctor goes, "Well, maybe you should start managing her portions a little bit and just help her maybe say no to seconds." And that single statement, after a life of never really thinking about what I ate, my mom always was very conscious about feeding us good choices, and we didn't really have snacks in the house, partly economic, partly just most snack foods that seemed to be available, weren't as going to keep us as satiated, so we're just going to keep eating snacks all day long. So we really stuck to our meals, and then we'd have fruits as snacks. So I'd really never worried about it until those words came out of her mouth. And I don't remember ever really materializing that to my mother until much later, that was a trigger for me. And I had never really even been aware of what my weight was. I knew that I was bigger than my sister, and I knew what my mom's weight was, and I knew what her waist size was. And I stepped on the scale when I got home. I remember a week or two later after the doctor's appointment, and I remember weighing myself and actually knowing what that number was, because I don't think they told me at the doctor's office, and realizing how much heavier I was than my mother. And I was only, 13 years old, and it was a kind of a kick to the system. And subconsciously and consciously all at the same time, I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to get back to the number that my mother was. So whatever weird goal you've had set in your mind that this is the weight I felt really good at. I have so many clients that I come to me and they're like, I would love to be at this weight. And it's always asking, well, why that weight? And it's typically a clothing size that they felt amazing at. This was what they got married at. This is when they were in college and they felt the most confident. And the ironic and the irony of it is typically at that point in time when they were at that perfect weight, they wanted to be a different weight. So if we really analyze why we want to be at a certain weight, we can actually kind of realize that we're never going to be perfectly happy with ourselves, because we are our own worst critic. So basically, at the same time as I got on the scale, I was also dealing with some behavioral issues with my poor, sweet, wonderful mother, homeschooling both my twin and myself and two younger siblings. And I was a pain in the neck. Straight up, couldn't focus. I could not retain material. I was frustrating to work with. I would have meltdowns and outbreaks. And my mother was like, your sister learns this is great. I don't understand what is going on. So wonderful as she is, we got testing. We had to figure out what was going on. And I was given an ADHD diagnosis. So many children are. And that's a whole separate topic I could go into for a long time, because I do feel like we overdiagnose children just simply because we can't sit still and focus, and not teaching good habits to be able to compensate and learn how to work around mental challenges. But everyone's got a different view on that. But anyway, at that point, I was put on medication. I was put on Adderall. And I was on a slow release. So what that would be is I would take it first thing in the morning, and it would basically release until about 5 p.m. and then it would wear off. And what I figured out what I could do is I didn't really have any interest in food. So I'd have breakfast. My dad was a big, we get downstairs for our quiet times at 6:30 and we'd have breakfast. And I enjoyed eating my breakfast with my dad. So that would be the time we would have a breakfast with him, and then I would take my pills, and I would know that I was not going to be hungry the rest of the day. And we had a really busy schedule. I was in theater and sports and just regular history co-ops and classes. We were all over the place. And it was easy, since we were responsible for our own lunches for the most part. Like, mom would obviously provide foods there. But our schedules were always so different that I could kind of get away with having an apple and kind of say I ate something else. I could have some veggies and say that it was just a snack because I had already had lunch, or I had it with friends, or whatever have you. And I started doing this partly subconsciously because of the pills, and then the other part was after that first weigh-in, I started weighing myself, and I saw the correlation very quickly that if I ate less, I could drop weight. And it became obsession where I couldn't go a day without weighing, and if my weight didn't go down, then I would have to restrict more, and it became a full-blown anorexia. I could not consume food. So over the next year and a half, almost 2 years, I dropped, 45 pounds, and I started to have people say things, and that was probably one of the most damaging things, despite it not trying to be damaging. When they would say things, it would be like a compliment, because, wow, you look so great. I had that tall, slender frame, and, I looked lean, and I really liked the compliments. And then I had people start getting worried, and the worry honestly was almost worse than the compliments, because it was someone saw me and was noticing that there was something going on, and they were concerned. So that worry also kind of fueled the fire to be in a very unhealthy mental part, made it worse. At the same time, I'm getting older, I'm working. I don't like that I'm on ADHD medication. Back, when I started the medication, I also realized that I could start exercising. If I exercised 30 minutes a day at my lunch break, I could focus longer after the pill wore off. So I worked out every day at lunch. I wrote my own little workouts. I did abs and random, like, run up the mountain on my lunch break or whatever I could come up with. A bunch of lunges. I would look up, books in the library for workouts, and I would write them out on my little notepad, and I would do that every day at lunch. And so I used that to an advantage, and it was all cardio because I was very much under the impression that abs and cardio are the way I wanted to look, and muscles would be a really bad thing. It was not ideal at that point. And I was also awkward in my height, and it was just so many different things about it. But essentially, I started this exercise routine, and I started learning that I could cope a little bit better and focus better if I used exercise to my advantage. So I started on the weekends stopping my medication. But what came with that was I was starving, and I didn't know how to manage hunger because I never dealt with it, because I never was interested in. And basically I would have my dinner with the family, and they might say things about, like, lovingly wanting me to eat more, but I could typically skate by with getting my dinner portion and being a little restrictive, and I wouldn't eat the bread or whatever it was, but then I just wouldn't eat anything, and so that was just my habit. But then on the weekends, during the day when I was starving and I had a whole day in front of me and I was hungry, and my body was obviously very underweight, I could see my ribs, and I didn't want to lose that. I was still terrified of gaining, but I still wanted to lose. And I couldn't look in the mirror. I definitely had that body dysmorphia where you look in the mirror and you see ribs, but you see fat in place of the ribs. And a lot of people still have that as adults who have not gone through eating disorders. They look at themselves and they focus on every little critical thing. And I know you as a listener have done that to yourself, where you fixate on something, because I have so many wonderful, beautiful clients who do this to themselves, and it's heartbreaking. I have so many athletes who are in amazing shape and can never be happy with where they're at. I do it to myself. I know people who are dropped 100 pounds and they still feel like they see themselves as the 100 pounds still on there. So it's a very normal thing to deal with, but it also can be very, very damaging because we trick ourselves into thinking something that is not truth. And when we lose focus on what is truth, then we are in a really scary spot. So essentially, I started to binge eat, and I noticed that weight was moving up, and this was not okay because I couldn't do that. That would not be okay. So I started to try to figure out how I could throw up. I knew that I couldn't stop the intense hunger, specifically because I did it to myself. I was starving. I ate very, very little calories. And if you listen to my first podcast, or I think it may have even been the second one, talking about if you're putting ourselves in a really extreme deficit, at a point, our body is going to see any new food, even if it's just a normal amount of food. So say my calculated calories at fasted coma calories were 1,800 calories. But I've been eating 800-900 calories every day for multiple years. If I eat 1,200 calories or 1,500 calories, my body will see that and want to store it because it is desperate for food. And a lot of it's not even fat storage. I mean, yes, you will store fat storage, specifically midsection visceral fat, because that's our organs and we need to protect our organs. However, we'll also simply just gain water that binds to glycogen. Like anytime you increase carbohydrates, you're going to have weight gain, not actual weight gain. It will level itself out. If you just simply moderate your carbs and keep that normal for a week, that initial fluctuation in fluffiness will go down because it's simply glycogen binding to water and you feel puffy. It's nothing that is actual fat. But anyway, so this is happening. I don't understand that. I don't understand what's going on. I just know that if I somehow had a lunch in my day, God forbid I had a lunch, I'm going to gain weight, so I need to do something about it. And the intensity of my hunger, because again, starving, my body is in overdrive when it finally can put out ghrelin, my hunger hormone. It's like, I need you to feed me. So then I'm craving high fat, I'm craving high sugar, all the things that I've convinced myself that I'm not allowed to have. Because at this time, I don't understand macronutrients. I just understand like the toxic diet culture of high calories, sugar, carbs, fat. There's all the things are bad. Junk food, eating out. We didn't really eat out, but very rarely as a family. And we certainly weren't going to, super expensive restaurants, and if we were going out, it would be like a Subway, or maybe like we'd splurge and we'd split a Chipotle burrito. So I never felt super conscious about eating out because we were pretty moderate. We'd split a Subway sandwich or whatever it was. But if I had the opportunity on my own, I knew I could go far beyond that. So anyway, I continued to experiment with how to make myself throw up. I learned, to my shame, I went through that binging session at the same time after the anorexia. And then I was gaining the weight, and I had to learn how to fix that. So I went into a binge purge. And that was basically a chronic, I would starve, and I would know how to essentially eat the right combination of foods, the right amount of water, so that I could purge. And it releases oxytocin. It releases I feel relaxed. I feel relieved. That pressure from your stomach is then relieved, and it's a positive cue in your brain, and it actually happens. However, what's happening internally, I was completely unaware of. What ends up happening is not only are we stretching our stomach with binge eating, so we're stretching the rugae to an extreme point where it's not really meant to be there, but we're also purging, and then we are depleting electrolytes very dramatically. We're throwing our enzymes completely off. We're pulling up bile into our esophagus, and we're putting wear and tear on that esophageal sphincter, which is basically what closes and holds the esophagus from the stomach, and the gastric juice, which is what people deal with when they get heartburn a lot. So we basically, in years of purging, you can erode your esophagus, and you can cause issues of long-term chronic heartburn because of doing this to yourself. And then obviously potassium, blood pressure is just plummeting because we have depleted our electrolytes from throwing up. And typically I would time it perfectly, and I would be convinced that somehow I wouldn't be retaining this. And then I get into bodybuilding and into weightlifting when I graduated high school. So I was 17, and I start college, and I'm in this training program where I have a trainer, and he's teaching me bodybuilding, and we're getting into how to build muscle. And he would point out to me that actually I don't need to get any leaner, because I would always tell him I need to get leaner. And I had put on a little bit of weight, because you will gain weight if you are binging. Even if you are purging, you're still going to put on about a third of those calories are still going to be absorbed. The body starts digestion as soon as it enters the mouth. So that is something that I was unaware of, and I was just frustrated by. So I would constantly tell my trainer, I need to get leaner. And he'd go, actually, no, if you want to do bikini shows, you need to put on muscle mass, because you're basically just skinny. And so he started kind of reminding me that food would be a good thing. And I'm in college trying to figure out what to do. And I remember telling my mom, like, I don't want to go to college. I don't feel like I'm smart enough for college. I don't know what I would do in college. And she's like, just find something that you like and go for that. Like, I got a scholarship. It was paying for my college. So it was like, you either take it or you lose it. So just pick something. And I was like, well, I'm obsessive about my weight. Let's study nutrition. And it was a horrible mindset. And I start my first semester, and I was like, what is going to make the most money in nutrition dietetics? So that's the focus I go on to, and it's clinical. So I'm starting college, I'm starting to bodybuild, I'm learning that food is actually going to be this tool that can actually help with building and sculpting, and then I'm learning that actually we do need protein, and this is what protein, carbs, and fat are. These are how they can help us manipulate our composition. But I'm not understanding the connection with hormones at all. I'm sitting incredibly low body fat, trying to build muscle, feeling like garbage, and there's no period, there's no energy, there's my ability to focus naturally is not going great, because my brain doesn't have a lot of energy to go off of. At the same time, I guess, to even rewind, I stopped my medications completely. I did not want to have to depend on medication to be able to control my behavior. And my dad made a point one day, and he might laugh if I'm sharing this, but he asked me one day, I had an outbreak, and I think we were having an argument. He goes, "Did you take your medication today?" And it stopped me in my tracks because I hadn't. And I was like, I don't want to be someone who can only be thought of being on good behavior because she took her medication. So I stopped almost immediately. And it took a lot of like getting used to, but again, then I'm dealing with hunger 24/7 because I'm still underweight. My body is craving foods, and it's going to gain because, again, years of not eating enough and then get these binge purge cycles. And obviously at this time, I'm starting to learn I'm going to eat a little bit more food in meals, and I'm going to get protein sources, and I'm going to get healthy carbs, which was still almost nothing if I'm looking at it. But I did start to gain weight in a healthy way, and I'm educating myself, and I'm purging a little bit less because I'm basically eating better, and so I don't have the need for it. But there would still be those times where I would just hit a point where I couldn't handle the hunger, and I would binge, and then obviously I would need to fix it. At the same time, I'm now driving, and I have money and I'm my own that I'm making enough where I can pay for my little fun things, and then also buy food at fast food places. And again, never grew up eating fast food, never been through an Arby's, never really been through a McDonald's. And I'm going to these fast food places, and I'm learning what things that I can consume. And I would do, to my shame, I would go to 4 or 5 places, and I would basically, on the way home from school, on the way home from studying nutrition dietetics to be able to help people, being in a eating disorder education class, the amount of shame, but 25% of us in that class had eating disorders, and none of us wanted to be willing to talk about it. I would give in to that, and I would always justify it. Well, this is not normal. It's just one more time. And then that oxytocin release would happen, and it'd be like, oh, okay, we're relaxed. And it would, this terrible cycle. So essentially, I'm in college, we're studying this, and I'm starting to get a better handle on things. I'm purging less. I have more control over myself, but I'm eating really healthy. So the binge purge became more into orthorexia. And orthorexia is basically an over-compulsive desire to be perfectly healthy in all food choices. So I could not eat quote-unquote bad things. And that became the new rule. If I ate a bad thing, that would be the only time I purged. And the only time I would justify it because I ate such a bad thing, I'm going to feel miserable, so I don't want to feel miserable, so I'm going to purge it. And then basically I was working in the hospital in my internship, and one of the dietitians, I think she knew, but she never actually ever said it out loud to me, but she definitely knew. We were talking about what happens when we consume food and we start absorption and then we purge it. We were talking about a malnourishment, a case of a severe malnourished patient, and we were doing a refeed syndrome, and she was talking about what happens and how carefully we have to be, and essentially all the things that happens when we starve our system, and now we flood the system with too many nutrients, we can cause huge issues. So we have to be very careful with patients who are incredibly malnourished. But she started talking about how we would look at a BMI chart, and someone would come in and they're at an overweight BMI, but their diet has been so severely restricted that they would have nutrient deficiencies in their fat-soluble vitamins that have been going on for years. But their weight wasn't in a malnourished category, but their actual minerals in their blood work were. So this was like, I'm learning all these things, I'm realizing some of these key parts of myself, and I remember committing that I was not, and she basically told me the story of this lady who died because of purging. She died on the bathroom floor, and I remember thinking I would never want, I guess at the point it was my boyfriend, I didn't want him to find me on the floor dead, and I didn't want my family to have to go through that. What a horrible way to go out, and whatever that motivation is, was the motivation I had. So I swore to myself that I would be able to binge, but I would not allow myself to purge. And I was convinced that that would basically cut it off. And that is basically the commitment to myself that I wanted to value my life more. And I didn't want the shame of other people finding out that I had this problem. was definitely a real thing. And I basically slowly learned to not binge because of the sheer discomfort of nights crying at home because or in my little studio apartment, because I was so uncomfortable, but I'd committed myself to not purge. So, and there was definitely times I fell into it again. And it was really over the next 3 years of like learning who I am as a person and valuing myself and being able to help other people working outpatient, working then in my business. It was slowly looking at like how to eat out and how to make food choices and still be okay. Obviously, during that whole orthorexia phase, I was tracking religiously. I couldn't go beyond it. But the tracking did give me that freedom to be like, you can eat. I did a reverse diet on myself to be able to get myself to a point where instead of gaining weight at 1,300 calories, I could finally hold weight at 1,300 calories. And then I could eat 1,400 calories. And it took almost 2 years to be able to get to a point where I could eat 2,100 calories. And now, fast forward, I can eat 2,800 calories in a day. I can feel good. I can stay lean. I don't have to worry about these things. But it took years, on top of also finding out that I had an insulin high A1C and getting on metformin for insulin. So there's so many other different parts to this story. But all that to say, it took years doing the field I'm in, working with people and seeing the same struggles, speaking to someone about their eating disorder while also dealing with one was huge. It was like I understand and I was able to like evaluate someone else's and then continue to work on my own. And that sounds horrible. And if you worked with me when I first started this business, you may have noticed or not. But I was really privileged to work with the people I did and help them in the ways I was. And I hope that they know the amount of impact they had on my own changes and being able to be in a really healthy relationship with food. And to the point where I remember going on a vacation and not tracking anything for the entire week, and it's such a huge win, and not stressing about the fact that I had ice cream or I had a fried food, and learning to like slowly add in fear foods, slowly add in bread, have a sandwich. And at this point, it's like those body dysmorphia tendencies will probably always follow me in certain ways. But I truly believe that when they say 95% of people don't recover from eating disorders, I do think that's wrong. I don't think that's an accurate representation, because we serve a God who is far more powerful than any mental health issue we can deal with, and he will give us the strength to get through it. And I think that we can oftentimes put ourselves in that box and say we can't get out of this because no one else can. And that's just the fate in life, and I'm going to deal with this. But I have worked with hundreds of people. I've seen so many eating disorder recoveries happen, and it is 100% possible. If you have a slight fallback, it does not mean you relapse and you're never going to get back on your feet again. It's simply, you messed up, you slipped up. If you can just simply move on, remind yourself that restricting food the next day will not benefit progress, that it will actually make things far worse. And it's doing that day in and day out, and then messing up again, and then doing it over and over again, and focusing on things that, being with people you enjoy, doing the activities that you enjoy, finding distractions. That was huge for me, finding things that I really loved, where food just became this kind of second thing, and getting into sport where it wasn't all about my body and exactly how my muscles looked and how do I form my figure into certain things, but just how do I perform, how do I feel when I'm working out, was huge. So finding something that takes the focus off of image and onto just feeling good. And now I really can eat anything. I choose to not eat certain foods very often because I don't feel as good and I'm not going to have the performance that I want. But if that is my only option, and if I'm going out to eat with someone, I'm not going to be like, no, I cannot have this. And my body is really good, and so is everyone else's body. Our liver and our kidneys do a really good job of taking care of us. It will clear through things. We have a fantastic colon that will get rid of things. And if we are able to have balance, but enjoy those times, we are going to be just fine. We live in a diet culture that is so focused on, you can't have this, this is bad. If we can put more focus onto how do we see food and why are we seeing it in that way, the change and the ability to start actually diving into intuitive eating is totally doable. It will take time, and in a lot of cases with so many of my patients and clients, it's training the body because of years of not being able to actually fuel the body by giving, this is what a portion size needs to look like. These are the nutrients we need. See how you feel with these needs met. Get into a habit where your body then has the habit set that this is what it needs within this meal, and then start removing one of those meals, and then you just choose. But you have to have the options available to you. You have to have good sources of protein. You have to have good sources of carbs. You have to have things available so that our chemical reactions in our brain of our eyes and our sight and our smells don't override at the internal. So, and it's also like not going super long periods of time, knowing your weaknesses. If there is something that does trigger you and you just have no self-control in this, being aware of that and knowing that that's not a bad thing, it's just something that you're dealing with in that moment. It could go away later on. And in most cases, I'd say in 95% of cases, it does. And so just being able to trust the process, be very kind to yourself, because there's a lot of things deep under the surface sometimes that we don't know about, and things that we do, and we're human and we're going to make mistakes, and that's the whole journey of loving ourselves, looking at ourselves as a temple that we want to take care of because God created us the way we are, and to be able to look and be able to serve others to the best of our ability because we have the energy because we're taking care of ourselves. So I hope this can inform some people, or to have a look into who I am and why I do what I do. And thank you for listening and let me sharing that with you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I will catch you back here next week.